Alright, welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John. It is time for another Motorweek retro review, and this time I have picked a car I've waited far too long to do a review of, and it is the '88 Chevy Beretta GTU. Now, Motorweek has several Berettas to choose from. I literally just picked this one at random, and before we get into it, I find this to be an extremely interesting car because it represents, I think in a lot of ways, both what was good and bad about GM in the mid-'80s. Now, bear with me for a second because I'm reading that book right there, if you can see it, Call Me Roger, about Roger Smith, the CEO of General Motors during the '80s. And the Beretta and its sister, the Corsica, were the first cars that were started and released during Roger Smith's tenure. And when he was in charge, he made a heavy push for GM to become more automated, with the idea of, well, having less factory workers. But they went after automation too aggressively. They exceeded the abilities of the technology at the time. Famously, they had paint spraying robots that were painting each other, or welding robots that would weld the doors onto cars, things like that. And very famously, there's at least one case where General Motors built an all-new, extremely modern, cutting-edge factory, and Mazda built one at the same time. The Mazda factory was smaller, employed less people, and was more productive with a higher quality car. The GM factories, with all of their technology, they actually ended up needing more people to support all the technology. And this put these cars at a price disadvantage when they were released. They had to charge something like $700 more per car than Toyota or Honda were charging for their vehicles. But these cars also offer the other side, which is that General Motors had been working with Toyota at the NUMMI factory, building the Corolla and what eventually became the Geo Prism. And they learned about the Toyota ethos of small teams, empowering the workers, treating them with respect, just-in-time delivery. And a lot of GM managers were very excited about this, but they GMified it because they went and they took an ethos, a baked-in way of doing business, and they turned it into checklists. And so when they created these factories for the Corsica and the Beretta, they kind of checked the boxes, including having manufacturing and engineering work together to make it an easier car to actually build, things like that. But what they ended up with were cars that were, in the Corsica's case, crude and noisy and droning and just not really competitive with what the Japanese were doing. But into this, you've got the Beretta. Now, it's essentially a two-door Corsica, but at its best, there's more than one article I read where they said the Beretta was proof that the Americans could go head-to-head with the Germans when they put their mind to it. So I've got my opinion, what I think this is going to say, but I'm excited to see what Motorweek said about the GTU when it's brand new. So grab your favorite beverage and let's take a look.
And Die Hard.
Hello and welcome to Motorweek '88. We're glad to have you with us. It's no secret that automakers back racing teams because a winning image sells more cars. Chevrolet has successfully backed NASCAR teams for years and is now making a big push in the IMSA GTU class. To celebrate this, Chevy has introduced a special street version of their Beretta race car. It's the front-drive successor to GM's long line of race-bred rear drivers that includes the Monte Carlo SS and Buick's fire-breathing Grand National. But does the Beretta GTU have what it takes to stand alongside its predecessors? The Beretta GTU must deal with more than the reputation of previous GM muscle cars. It must also contend with the fast-growing renown of its race car cousin. The Beretta racer started its competition life in IMSA's GTU series by winning the Miami Grand Prix and has since gone on to build an impressive record. This will lead many prospective Chevy buyers to expect a similarly exciting car in the Beretta GTU. Unlike the Monte Carlo SS, which is a specific model, however, the GTU is an optional appearance package which is added to a red, white, or black Beretta GT.
So before they go on, let's talk about the styling here. And you know what? I always kind of liked it. It's okay. It's a little overly square. I don't know, there's a lot of lumina, what would become the lumina in the back rear window there. It's okay. I kind of liked it. I always kind of liked the Corsica. I like the squared off style, but it doesn't quite, I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't really have any elegance to it. You know, it's styled, it's, you know, some of the edges are rounded, but it's not beautiful. I just always thought it was pretty good looking, but not outstanding. I bet they'll show the rear later. Not a big fan of it, but we'll talk about that at that point.
Coach Builder Cars and Concepts has done a remarkable job of designing racy add-ons that don't make the normally shark-like Beretta look like Moby Dick. The front end drops menacingly thanks to a deep, aggressive chin spoiler. A body color grille and wide hood bulge contribute to the non-standard look. The body extensions continue in an uninterrupted rearward flow with flared wheel arches and side skirts. The hefty tail wraps it all up with a large race-style spoiler and prominent lower body extensions.
So, I'll just jump in there. The rear end, let's talk about this for a second. I've never liked that light bar across the Beretta. It's too chunky for me, right? Like, they just like, well, we've got all this space, let's just do this with it. Again, it lacks a certain elegance almost. However, that contrasts for me with these add-ons they're talking about. Surprisingly reserved. You know, certainly when you think about what Pontiac did with body cladding anywhere, this is pretty reserved. And, you know, say what you will about this tacked-on spoiler, I like it. I think it breaks up the rear end. I kind of like it.
The racing background is reinforced by fat Goodyear Eagles mounted on special 16-inch aluminum wheels. As add-ons go, it's the best we've seen. At $2,500, it's also expensive, so you pay for quality. The GT drivetrain means that power comes from Chevy's tried and true 2.8-liter V6. Making 130 horsepower and 160 pound-feet of torque, it's adequate for most driving, but hardly on a par with other race-derived Chevys like the IROC Camaro.
You know, that's an okay engine. I don't have a real strong feeling one way or the other about the 2.8 liter. I don't personally know of it being overwhelmingly troublesome. I'm sure mechanics who are watching this will let me know if I'm wrong there, but also found it kind of underwhelming. Another example to me of Americans, but General Motors specifically, having to use a V6 to get the same kind of performance that you would get from four-cylinder imports. Mostly because I think the cars were just heavier overall. I like the engine in this usage. It's supposed to be a little more powerful, so, you know, have a V6, but this is an underwhelming V6. I mean, it's just okay. But let's see what they say at the track here.
It pulls the GTU from 0 to 60 in 9.2 seconds. The quarter mile takes 17 seconds at 81 miles per hour. Quite respectable by family car standards.
So I'd like to also jump in here and say that I just did, I don't know, a few days ago, the reaction video for the Golf GTI. And granted, that was, I don't remember what year it was, 81 maybe, something like that. So that was, you know, 7 years before. It made substantially less horsepower. It was substantially less car, but it did 0 to 60 in, like, I think it was 9.7. And they called that exhilarating. So for the time, this isn't bad acceleration, certainly considering that it's substantially more car.
The rubbery 5-speed manual shifter in our test car discouraged quicker trips through the gears. This same unit performed much better in the last Beretta GT we tested. As long as you're willing to accept that this is simply a nicer Beretta GT, you're fine. If you're looking for 6-second 0 to 60 times, you'd best look elsewhere. That's not to say that the GTU isn't capable. The Z51 suspension retains and improves upon the crisp handling that endeared us to the GT and exhibits much less body roll than its plainer sibling. The steering has better feel than previous Berettas, but is still a bit overboosted for our taste. More road feel would go a long way towards improving driver confidence. But the grip is there, even if you can't feel it. The GTU glues itself to the road in high-speed maneuvers and refuses to let go. Braking is much improved over our last Beretta, with average stops of 121 feet from 60 miles per hour. Pedal fade is minimal and front lockup has disappeared. Straight, smooth stops are now the norm.
So really impressive. While they said the steering's a little overboosted, right? Look at it going through the cones, and they talked about the grip, that it just held on, and the braking there. No drama, no smoke, no noise, no sliding sideways. 121 feet certainly isn't bad. Just, wow, it just did its job. That's kind of impressive, actually.
With all the exterior flash, you'd expect a special edition interior as well. Not so. The Beretta GTU uses the custom trim package from the GT. Only a badge on the dashboard tells you that you're in a special car. Seating consists of the same manually adjustable buckets found in the GT, complete with seat bottom tilt. We liked them then, and we like them now. The dash is one of GM's better recent designs. It's handsome and functional, with a grade of plastic that equals that found in some Japanese competitors.
I'll disagree with them. So maybe they're right. Maybe the quality of the plastic was fine, and this is one of their better efforts. I think that speaks very poorly to how bad the previous efforts must have been. I think I really dislike the interior. I think it's functional, right? Probably very easy to clean. I just, I'm glad that we've kind of moved past putting these buttons up here on either side of the instrument cluster. Not a big fan. And over on the passenger side of the dash, it's like they just didn't know what to do with it. Like, well, we'll just put a shelf and then just cut it off. It just, I don't know. I think it's ugly. I really, really do. Radio's mounted kind of low. And that radio, if we see some more of it, it's kind of a weird mix of GM leaping into the modern day of the time, but still having that silver, that chrome at the end of the volume and the tuning knobs that harkened back to my first Buick from the 70s. Just a weird mix. I imagine it's functional. I imagine it's comfortable. I'm sure it was fine. And I remember, I don't remember what year it was, 90, something like that. Whenever it was, I remember seeing a Corsica in the dealership, and I liked the interior. It was cheap, but I liked it. So this is a little bit too much of looking back and being critical. I just don't think it's very stylish or good looking.
Our test car came with the Beretta's optional digital gauge package. We recommend sticking with the cleaner analog gauges instead. Heat and stereo controls are typical Beretta, clear and simple. Their underdash pod position does force you to reach for them, however. The rear seat offers better legroom than most Oriental competitors, but headroom is a bit tight. Shoulder belts are now standard for rear seat passengers. One of our biggest complaints about the Beretta GT naturally applies to the GTU. The small opening and intruding power deck lid release ruins an otherwise excellent trunk. EPA miles.
That power deck lid release right there. Wow. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to say pure GM, pure mid-80s GM right there. We want to offer a power deck lid. That's a super cool idea. That adds a little bit of value to the car. Let's do it. Well, we can't really work it. Well, just bolt it onto the back. It'll be fine. There was no sweating the details in that one. No attempt to move it somewhere else. And GM cars, I've said it on other retro review reactions, that GM was very slow and very timid in doing really deep cuts around down to the bumper for loading in things. This kind of was them trying to do it, but still wanting some structural rigidity. It's okay. Trust me, there was worse, but it was okay. I don't have a problem with it.
Mileage estimates for the GTU's platform are 19 city and 29 highway. Our mixed test loop returned a disappointing 19 miles per gallon. The small gas tank cuts the car's range even further. Interior sound levels for our GTU was a low 66 decibels at 55. The same, unfortunately, cannot be said for the price. Once you add the GTU's $2,500 price to a loaded GT, you get a hefty $14,649 price tag. This puts the Beretta GTU at a disadvantage when compared to one logical competitor, the limited production Chrysler Shelby CSX. The CSX offers all the exterior goodies at a lower price, and it's a genuine performance car to boot.
I'd take the Shelby all day long compared to this. Not that I trust the Chrysler product's reliability more, but I think it's just a more honest car, if I'm being honest. Before we move on, I want to say 66 decibels. That's real. I think they underplayed that a little bit. That's really good. That's really quite quiet. The EPA mileage, that isn't bad for a V6, but then they only got 19. I wonder how much of that was either the car being new and tight, or the way they drove, or if it truly was just not that efficient when you actually drove it as a daily driver. And then it said it had a small fuel tank. That's kind of a surprise. You would think that GM, who knows how to build cars, would know to give a family a gas tank. Interesting.
On our safety check, the Beretta GTU passes with rear shoulder belts, 5-mile-per-hour bumpers, and radial tires. It lacks front passive restraints and anti-lock brakes. Hits start with the GTU package's tastefully flashy approach to add-ons. We also like the solid handling, heavier steering feel, and improved brakes. Misses include the high price, mild drivetrain, poor gas mileage on our car, and tight trunk opening. Most elements are already in place to turn the Beretta GTU into a superior road machine. Chevy only needs to fit a bit more power under that traffic-stopping skin to turn the spirit of this sharp little front driver into a machine that's truly worthy of its racing.
Okay, so I guess they were just done. That was interesting, and kind of about what I expected. Except I expected them to play up its ride and handling and comfort balance a little bit differently than they did. Hard to believe $14,000 in some change is too expensive, but that's 35 years ago. That means that a base level Beretta or a lower level Beretta would be about $12,000. I don't remember where the Corsica fell at the time. I want to say it was in the tens, but anyway, interesting. It's a memorable car for me. Not because it's overly beautiful. I think it's handsome, but not beautiful. Not because the interior was that fantastic, but again, in real life, when I sat in a Corsica, I liked it. When it was brand new, I liked it a lot. In fact, just to finish up with that story, I remember when I looked at that Corsica, it was one of those situations where if I'd had the money, that probably would have been the car I chose. Now, I know better now. I would get a Honda Accord, but at the time, it was a compelling package. This, I don't know. The Beretta never really did it for me. Not a huge fan of the two doors to begin with. But again, the reviews of it at the time were extremely positive about its ride, its handling, its acceleration, and everything else. Motorweek gives it a detriment for safety because it doesn't have anti-lock brakes, but when you watch that braking performance, spot on. Didn't necessarily need anti-lock brakes except in certain situations. So kind of positive, but I really expected it to be more positive. I thought that the interior would get slightly better marks, maybe maybe be talked up a little bit more for being stylish for its time and competitive for its time, and the performance, and again that ride handling balance. There was at least one, and I think I read a couple of different articles when these cars were new, favorably comparing them to 3 Series BMWs. And I expected more of that here. Now, the Corsica and the Beretta have kind of faded away, and I don't think anybody really ever sees them becoming a classic, but they were a relatively good effort. They just weren't at the top of the class. So if you had one, if you remember them and you have a positive opinion, let me know. I have a positive opinion of the car. It's just not something I ever would have wanted to own. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you being here.